The American bison, spirit of the Great Plains. The wind sweeps endlessly across the Great Plains, carrying with it the whispers of time, stories of thunderous hooves, rolling prairies, and the mighty creatures that once ruled them. Before the railroads, before the cities, before the fences cut the land into pieces, the American bison was king. Once numbering in tens of millions, these magnificent beasts shaped not just the land, but also the lives and spirits of the people who called it home. The story of the American bison is the story of America itself, of abundance, destruction, resilience, and rebirth. The land before the fence. Long before settlers crossed the Mississippi, the central heart of North America was a sea of grass. From Canada down to Texas, the Great Plains stretched endlessly, a landscape so vast that a person could travel for days and never see a tree. In this open world, the bison moved like living rivers, herds of thousands flowing across the land. Early explorers wrote that the earth seemed to move beneath their feet when a herd passed. The sound of their hooves was like thunder, and the dust rose like storm clouds. To the Plains tribes, Lakota, Cheyenne, Comanche, Kiowa, and others, the bison was more than food. It was life itself. The bison gave them meat to eat, hides for clothing and shelter, bones for tools, and spirit for ceremony. Nothing was wasted. Every part of the animal had a purpose. Even the sinew was used for sewing. To kill a bison was not an act of conquest, but of gratitude. They believed the Great Spirit had placed the bison on earth to sustain them. The people followed the herds, living in balance with the rhythm of the land. Their songs and prayers thanked the bison for its sacrifice. In return, the animal offered life to the people. It was a circle, whole and unbroken, until the strangers came. The iron horse and the rifle. By the mid-1800s, the sound of the prairie began to change. The thunder of bison hooves was joined and then drowned by the scream of the iron horse, the steam locomotive. With the expansion of railroads came hunters, traders, and soldiers. Bison hides became a booming business. Factories in the East demanded leather for belts and machinery. Hunters could earn good money, sometimes more than they'd ever dreamed, by shooting bison from trains and leaving the carcasses to rot. In just a few decades, tens of millions of bison were slaughtered. Skulls were piled in mountains. Bones were ground into fertilizer. The Great Plains, once alive with motion and sound, became eerily silent. The rivers ran clear again, but the land felt empty. For the Plains tribes, the destruction of the bison was not just an ecological disaster. It was an act of war. The U.S. government knew that to break the tribes, they had to destroy the bison. Without the herds, the people could not survive on the plains. Their freedom, their traditions, their way of life all depended on the buffalo. By the 1880s, the near end of the bison marked the near end of a culture that had thrived for centuries. The people were pushed onto reservations. The prairies that once fed millions of hooves were now covered with barbed wire and plows. The American bison, once numbering over 30 million, was reduced to fewer than 500. The last of the wild ones. In 1883, a young man named William Hornaday, chief taxidermist at the Smithsonian Institution, traveled to the plains to collect specimens of the bison for the museum. He expected to find herds. Instead, he found bones. Horrified, he returned to Washington and made it his life's mission to save what was left. He wrote, "The extermination of the buffalo has been the most shocking crime ever committed by man against the animal creation." At the same time, a handful of ranchers, both native and non-native, began to realize what was being lost. Men like Charles Goodnight in Texas and Scotty Phillip in South Dakota gathered a few remaining animals and raised them on private land. Unknowingly, they became the saviors of a species. In Yellowstone National Park, one small wild herd survived, just 23 animals, hidden deep in the park's remote valleys. These bison, descendants of ancient herds, became the seed for future generations. For a moment, it seemed too late. But nature has a quiet resilience. Even in the smallest herd, the heartbeat of the plains still pulsed. The return of the thunder. The early 20th century brought a new movement, conservation. Americans were beginning to realize that progress without protection was destruction. Organizations like the American Bison Society, founded by Hornaday and supported by President Theodore Roosevelt, began breeding and reintroducing bison to protected lands. Slowly, the numbers began to grow. Yellowstone's herd expanded. Bison were sent to new reserves in Montana, Oklahoma, and Canada. By the 1930s, the population had risen from hundreds to thousands. It was still fragile, but it was hope. And hope, once rooted, can grow wild. Meanwhile, Native communities also began reclaiming the animal that had defined their ancestors' lives. To many tribes, the bison was not just returning to the land, it was returning to the spirit of their people. Ceremonies were revived. Songs once whispered in sorrow were sung again in joy. The circle that had been broken was beginning, slowly, to mend. The spirit lives on. Today, more than 500,000 bison roam across North America, not in the wild numbers of the past, but enough to fill the plains once again with movement and strength. About 30,000 live in conservation herds protected by national parks and tribal lands. The rest are managed on private ranches, often as hybrids for meat production, a reminder that even recovery comes with compromise. Yet, for many, the bison remains sacred. On reservations like the Fort Peck and Wind River, tribal nations are working with scientists to restore pure wild bison, free from cattle genes, to their ancestral lands. To stand in their presence, massive, calm, powerful, is to feel the pulse of ancient America. Their breath clouds in the cold morning air. Their eyes are dark and deep, like wells of time. When they move, the ground seems to remember something, a rhythm older than roads or fences. Symbols and shadows. The bison is more than an animal. It's a symbol of what was lost and what was regained. It appears on coins, state flags, sports teams, and the emblem of the U.S. Department of the Interior. In 2016, it was officially named the National Mammal of the United States, standing beside the bald eagle as a twin symbol of the nation. But unlike the eagle, the bison carries the memory of tragedy, a story of human greed and redemption. It reminds us that progress without balance destroys both nature and soul. Every bison herd that roams today is living proof that healing is possible, that the earth can forgive if we choose to protect. The call of the plains. Stand on the plains at sunset and listen. You might hear the faint echo of hooves, the deep rumble of life that once shook the continent. The grasses sway, whispering secrets to the wind. A shadow moves on the horizon, heavy, shaggy, ancient. It is the spirit of the bison, the heartbeat of the land, returned to its home. Where the trains once whistled and the hunters once fired, there is now quiet strength. The bison grazes again, unhurried, unbroken. And somewhere in the wind's long sigh, the land seems to say, "Welcome back."